Anna Morales stood in the doorway of her tiny wooden cabin, the warm orange light at her back spilling out into the blue darkness of the snow. A wreath hung beside her, its red ribbon trembling no mize with every gust of icy wind, while she hugged her coat tight around her chest and stared at the strangers in front of her. A man stood in the storm, coat dusted white, breath turning to steam, his arms wrapped around a little girl in a pink jacket and wool hat, her face pale against his shoulder. Snow swirled around them, trying to push them backward into the forest, as if the night itself wanted them gone. Every part of Anna screamed to close the door, but as she met the man's terrified eyes and saw the child's limp hand, one thought rose above the fear: not on Christmas. Seconds earlier, the door had still been shut, the cabin quiet except for the soft hiss of the kettle and the faint buzz of a tired old string of Christmas lights. The first knock had crashed through that quiet like a stone through glass, hard and frantic, rattling the frame as if someone might break it down. Anna's heart had lurched into her throat, her body frozen in the middle of the room, listening to the wood vibrate under each blow. When the knocking came again, faster, she'd felt her knees weaken with a fear she thought she'd locked away. She had crept toward the door on stiff legs, already whispering to herself that she would not open it. She had promised herself that a year ago, on this same worn floor, with blood on her lip and her savings jar shattered beside her. Back then, another stranger in need had stood in this doorway, voice shaking, eyes wet, asking only to use the phone. She had opened the door without thinking, and he had pushed past her, tearing through drawers and shelves, until he found the money she had scraped together from long, aching shifts as a home care worker. When he left, he took her security with him and left a bruise on her ribs and a crack in her trust. From that night on, her rule had been simple. No one came in after dark. No one. But tonight the knocking had come with another sound, a small, broken whimper that didn't belong to a grown man. Anna had edged to the little window, wiped the frost with her sleeve, and peered out into the blur of snow. That was when she saw them. The man, shivering but standing firm, and the small bundle in his arms. Even through the storm-streaked glass, she could see that the child's cheeks were too red, the skin too shiny with fever, her head drooping as if it were too heavy to hold up. The man looked toward the cabin as though it were the last light in a world of darkness. Now, with the door open just enough for the heat to bleed out and the cold to snake in, Anna took in every detail like a photograph she would never be able to forget. The man's gloved hand shook as he adjusted the little girl, murmuring her name under his breath as if afraid it might slip away from his memory, like she might slip from his arms. Her eyelashes were clumped with melted snow, her lips parted in a shallow, rapid breath that made Anna's own chest ache. The wind cut straight through Anna's thin jeans, but what chilled her more was the thought of turning them away. It would be so easy to slam the door, slide the bolt, and pretend she had never heard. Easy and unbearable. Because behind all her fear, she knew what waited on the other side of such a choice. Long, sleepless nights, replaying the image of a father walking back into the forest with a sick child in his arms. The silent accusation in her own reflection when she looked into the mirror, asking what kind of woman could stay warm beside her fire, knowing there was a child freezing in the snow. She thought of her empty pantry, the last logs stacked by the fireplace, the unpaid bill on the table. She had so little left. Losing any piece of it scared her, but losing the little piece of goodness her mother had planted in her scared her even more. Her mother's voice rose up from memory, as clear as the Christmas hymns she used to hum in a kitchen even smaller than this. "We don't close our hearts on Christmas, Mija," she would say, even when there was barely enough food for two, and she was setting 3 plates on the table. Anna could almost feel those gentle hands at her back now, urging her forward, reminding her that fear had already stolen enough from her life. The storm roared around them, but inside her it was even louder. Fear, pride, poverty, and something else fighting for space. The man shifted his weight, his boots sinking deeper into the snow, his jaw clenched as if to bite back panic. "Please," he said, voice hoarse, the word torn from him rather than spoken. "My daughter, she's burning up. We just need a place to get her warm, just for a little while." The girl stirred weakly at the sound of his voice, a thin cough shaking her small frame. Ina's fingers tightened on the edge of the door, the wood digging into her palm, anchoring her in the moment between turning away and letting them in. She glanced back over her shoulder into the cabin, the flickering fire, the chipped mug on the table, the sagging couch draped with her grandmother's quilt. This was all she owned in the world, and it barely seemed like enough even for one person. She thought of the times she had come home from double shifts, legs throbbing, hands raw, believing she was completely alone and invisible. Opening this door felt like inviting trouble, risk, maybe even danger, straight into the only safe place she had left. Yet as she turned back to the figures in the snow, she couldn't help seeing not strangers, but two people more helpless than she was. Her throat tightened, and when she finally found her voice, it came out as little more than a breath. "Not on Christmas," she whispered, this time not as a thought, but as a decision taking shape in the cold air between them. The words didn't magically erase her fear. They simply stood beside it, small but stubborn, like a candle refusing to go out. With a slow, shaky breath, Anna pushed the door wider, letting the blizzard's roar flood the tiny cabin and beckoning them forward with a small nod. "Come in," she added, almost surprised to hear herself say it. The man didn't wait for a second invitation. He stepped over the threshold, carrying the girl as gently as if she were made of glass, the warmth of the room wrapping around them like invisible arms. Snow fell from his coat onto the wooden floor, melting into dark little puddles beside Anna's worn boots. Up close, she could see lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the kind that didn't come from just one long night, but from many. "Thank you," he said again, voice breaking now that the immediate danger of the wind was behind him. "My name is Daniel. This is Lily." Anna closed the door against the storm and turned the lock out of old habit. But this time the sound meant something different. The world was still out there, cold and cruel, and ready to take advantage of her if it could. Yet inside, in the fragile pocket of warmth she had invited them into, something new was forming, thin as ice on the window, but real. As she guided Daniel to the couch and reached for her grandmother's quilt to wrap around Lily, she believed she knew what this night would be. A small act of mercy, a quiet, hidden moment no one else would ever see. She had no idea that the man sitting in her cramped little cabin was a billionaire, and that by opening her door to him tonight, she had just opened her life to a storm far greater than the one outside. Anna moved through the cabin with the careful, almost reverent quiet of someone who had spent years learning not to disturb the world around her. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, Lily curled against him under the worn quilt, her breaths shallow but steadier now in the warmth. The fire cracked softly, throwing long shadows across the room that wavered each time the wind pressed its palms against the walls. Anna reached for the old thermometer, shaking it down with practiced ease, her pulse a steady drum in her ears. She had treated fevers before, countless times, but none had ever felt as fragile as this one. When she knelt beside Lily, Daniel flinched, not from fear of her, but from fear of doing something wrong, of letting go even a little. His hand hovered above his daughter's back as if she might vanish the moment he loosened his hold. Anna's voice stayed low and warm as she asked him to lift the quilt just enough for her to slip the thermometer beneath the girl's arm. Lily barely stirred, her eyes flickering open only long enough to reveal a glimmer of fever-bright confusion. Anna brushed a curl from the girl's forehead, the heat beneath her fingers worrying, but not yet terrifying. Behind her, the kettle clicked as it cooled, and the soft pop of expanding metal sounded like tiny fireworks in the quiet. The cabin, always small, felt even smaller now, walls closing in, air heavy with smoke, fear, and something gentler beneath it all. Daniel kept glancing around as though checking for exits, for dangers, for anything he might have overlooked. His shoulders were too tense for someone simply caught in a storm. There was a different kind of cold clinging to him, something that had frozen long before the snow touched his coat. Anna noticed, but asked nothing. When she stood, Daniel rose with her automatically, as if pulled by a string tied around his chest. Is she okay?" he murmured, voice tight with hope and dread fighting for ground. Anna nodded toward the kitchen table, motioning for him to sit again so she could prepare something warm. "She needs heat, rest, and fluids," she said gently, choosing each word the way she chose her steps on icy nights, slow, deliberate, careful. "The fever's high, but not the worst I've seen." She didn't add the part she was thinking, not yet. As Daniel sat again, exhaustion seemed to settle onto him like another layer of snow. His face, illuminated by the firelight, was deeply lined for someone who looked not old, but worn, frayed at the edges by nights, just like this one. The phone in his pocket buzzed quietly, but he ignored it with the stiff determination of someone pretending they didn't hear a sound that terrified them. Ina pretended not to notice, though the sharp vibration echoed in her chest like a question left unanswered. She poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs, letting the steam unfurl between them. When she handed him one of the mugs, Daniel hesitated, as if unused to being offered something without it being requested, expected, or required. He wrapped both hands around it, letting the heat seep slowly into his fingers. Ina sat across from him, watching the steam rise between them like a barrier and a bridge at once. For a moment, the two of them simply breathed, her breaths slow and steady, his quick and uneven. Outside, the storm screamed against the roof, but inside the cabin a strange stillness settled, thick and hesitant. Anna glanced toward Lily every few seconds, instinctively tracking the girl's breathing the way a mother tracks a clock in the dark. She felt Daniel's gaze on her, but didn't meet it. She was too busy trying to keep her own past from rising like smoke in her throat. Every movement she made, setting a mug down, adjusting the fire, checking the girl's blanket, felt watched, measured, studied. Not with suspicion, but with a kind of silent desperation she recognized in people who had run out of places to run. She wondered what kind of life put that expression on a man's face. The thermometer beeped, and Anna retrieved it, her movements brisk but gentle. She leaned over Lily, reading the number with a slow inhale that she tried to hide. High, but manageable for now. Daniel watched her eyes move across the screen, searching her expression for any sign of disaster. "She'll be all right tonight," Anna said softly, offering the words like a small gift she hoped he wouldn't drop. "We just have to keep her warm." The relief on Daniel's face was so sudden, so raw, that it hit Anna like a weight pressed gently against her chest. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The fire whispered. The storm raged. Lily slept. Anna's cabin, the place where silence usually brought comfort, felt filled with a different kind of quiet tonight, a quiet that wasn't empty but waiting. Daniel finally broke it with a low murmur, barely louder than the crackle of a log splitting in the flames. "Thank you," he said, and the words sounded like they hurt him to say, like they were foreign to his mouth. "You didn't have to open the door." Anna swallowed, her gaze drifting to the window, where snow clung to the glass like white hands. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I did." For a moment, the warmth of the room almost made the world outside feel distant, unreal. But then Daniel's phone buzzed again, longer this time, and he flinched, his grip tightening around the mug. Ina looked up, and their eyes met for the briefest second, a question hanging between them like a loose thread, waiting to be pulled. He didn't answer it. He only silenced the phone, jaw tightening as though bracing for something she couldn't yet see. And Anna realized, with a slow ripple of unease, that the storm outside wasn't the only one standing at her door tonight. Anna senses that Daniel isn't just a father caught in a blizzard, but she doesn't yet know why. Anna moved through the small cabin with movements so instinctive they felt inherited, as if her mother had passed them down along with the quilt and the chipped mugs. She placed another log in the fire, the sparks leaping up like startled fireflies before settling into steady orange embers. The warmth crept slowly across the room, softening Lily's breathing and easing the tight line of fear along Daniel's jaw. For a moment, in the glow of the hearth, everything looked almost peaceful, almost like a Christmas Eve from another life. But peace, Anna knew, wasn't something that stayed long in her home. She tried not to think about the evening before this storm, about the quiet rhythms that had defined her life since losing her job. Mornings spent sweeping the porch steps, afternoons walking to the mailbox, hoping for good news and getting only bills, nights spent knitting loose stitches she never finished. People in town still smiled politely at her, but they no longer offered work. No one needed extra help from a woman who had been unlucky too many times. She filled the silence by humming her mother's songs, letting the echoes of another era keep her company in a cabin too still for comfort. But every night, when the darkness thickened outside the windows and the forest creaked under the weight of wind, the same memory rose like a bruise inside her chest. The night a stranger had stood exactly where Daniel had stood, on her doorstep, shivering, pleading, saying he needed help. She had opened the door then too, without hesitation, because kindness used to feel like instinct, not risk. And minutes later, she found herself shoved onto the floor, breath knocked out of her, shame burning hotter than fear. Nothing had been the same after that. She remembered the sound of the coin jar hitting the floor, scattering her mother's old tips and her own meager savings like spilled hope. Remembered the young man's rushed apologies that meant nothing, the way he looked back only once. Not with guilt, but with contempt. She remembered lying there afterward, tasting metal in her mouth, feeling the weight of every choice she ever made settle on her ribs like stones. That was the night she'd become a different woman. The night she told herself the world had taught her enough lessons, and she would not let it teach her any more. That promise had become a shield, thin, dented, unreliable, but hers. She kept it faithfully, even when loneliness pressed against her like a second winter, even when the nights grew long and silent and the forest whispered outside her windows, even when she would have given anything to hear another human voice. Opening the door tonight had felt like cracking that shield in half, letting an old wound breathe again. And now, seeing Lily's small, fever-flushed face resting against Daniel's arm, she didn't know whether that wound was beginning to heal or beginning to bleed. Daniel shifted on the couch, pulling Anna from her thoughts. He watched her with a quiet intensity, as though he sensed something heavy lingering in the air, but didn't dare ask about it. His eyes were sharp, trained, always observing, yet haunted in a way she didn't understand. The firelight glinted against the moisture on his lashes, a shine that startled her. She had seen fear before, but this was something else, a man pushed to the very edge of himself, holding on only because someone depended on him. It softened something in her, against her will. Anna poured warm water into a bowl, dipping a cloth into it and wringing it out with gentle, practiced hands. She carried it back to Lily, placing it lightly against the girl's forehead. Daniel let out a breath he'd been holding in his chest for too long. "You're very good at this," he whispered, not in flattery, but in genuine bewilderment. As though unfamiliar with the shape of gratitude, Anna shrugged lightly, eyes fixed on the child. "I used to care for people," she replied, "before life changed." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Silence settled again, but not the heavy, suffocating kind that used to fill her nights. This one felt different, tentative, fragile, stretching between two people who barely knew each other and yet shared a room thick with fear and firelight. The wind pressed against the windows, rattling the glass like an impatient visitor denied entry. Daniel shifted forward slightly, elbows on knees, as though bracing himself for something only he could sense. Ina wondered for the first time what danger he had left behind before reaching her door. She reached for the old kettle again, pouring hot water into a smaller cup to help Lily breathe easier. As she leaned over the child, something glinted near the collar of Daniel's coat, a polished piece of metal, almost hidden, engraved with initials she couldn't quite read. It didn't look like something a struggling father would wear. It looked expensive in a way that made her throat tighten. She opened her mouth to ask about it, then stopped herself. Some questions felt like stepping onto thin ice. Outside, a distant rumble shivered through the night, so faint Anna thought she imagined it. But Daniel heard it too. His head snapped up, eyes locking on the window with sudden electric alertness. He straightened, every muscle in his body going rigid, his hand tightening protectively around Lily. The warmth of the cabin seemed to fade in an instant, replaced by something sharper, colder, more dangerous. Anna felt her own breath catch, the room shrinking around her as she whispered, "What was that?" Daniel didn't answer her, not with words. He only whispered one thing, eyes wide with a fear that didn't belong to a storm. "They found us." For a heartbeat, the cabin held its breath, firelight wavering, shadows trembling across the walls as if they sensed the shift in the air. Daniel's whisper lingered between them like smoke, thin but impossible to ignore. Anna stared at him, her pulse thudding in her ears, trying to understand how a simple father in a storm could speak words so heavy with dread. The distant rumble outside faded into the roar of the wind, leaving only silence behind it. But the fear in Daniel's eyes didn't fade with it. He rose from the couch slowly, careful not to jostle Lily, but every movement was sharp now, honed like the edge of a blade. Ina stood as well, her hands instinctively curling into fists, not from anger, but from the instinct to protect the small space she still controlled. "Found you," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt to steady it. "Who is looking for you?" Daniel didn't answer. His gaze stayed locked on the window, as though the storm might peel back at any moment and reveal a threat waiting just beyond the trees. Ina moved closer, her fear rising not just for herself now, but for Lily, whose breathing rasped softly under the quilt. "Daniel," she pressed, forcing her voice into something firm, something that belonged to the woman she used to be. "If there's danger coming here, I need to know." He swallowed hard, jaw tightening, as though he were holding back a truth too heavy to place in her hands. The fire popped violently in the silence, sending a spray of sparks across the stone hearth. Finally, Daniel dragged a palm across his forehead and let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "I didn't want to bring this to your door," he murmured, voice raw, frayed at the edges. "I didn't plan any of this. We were supposed to be hidden by now, far from anyone. Hidden." Anna felt the words sink into her chest, cold and dense as winter ice. She looked at Lily again, tiny, sick, helpless, and the idea of running, of hiding, felt impossibly out of place in the small cabin where the world usually forgot to look. "Who are they?" Anna asked again, softer this time, but steadier. Daniel finally looked at her, really looked, his eyes full of a kind of apology she didn't understand yet. "People from my life," he said simply, though nothing about his tone was simple. "People who don't appreciate decisions I've made." or the choices I'm considering." It was a vague answer, too vague, and it prickled at Anna's skin like needles of sleet. She wiped her palms against her jeans, grounding herself in the worn fabric. The wind outside slammed hard against the cabin door, making Lily stir with a thin whimper. Daniel rushed to her side, his breath shaking as he rested a hand on her back. The sight of him, this strong, tense man softening instantly at the sound of his child, made Anna's heart twist. Whatever he was hiding, she could see the truth of this. He loved the girl more than anything, and fear had carved something sharp into his soul. Still, love wasn't enough to protect them if danger followed him here. She knelt beside the couch, checking Lily's pulse at her neck, her brow creasing as she felt the girl's skin still burning. "Her fever's climbing again," Anna murmured. "Stress and cold aren't helping." Daniel's face crumpled, guilt pressing into every line of it. "I shouldn't have taken her out," he whispered. "I should have stayed, faced it. But I couldn't, not with her caught in the middle." Anna didn't know what "it" was, but she knew a father willing to walk through a blizzard wasn't running from something small. She rose and walked to her cupboard, retrieving the last packet of broth and a small jar of menthol balm. As she worked, she felt Daniel's gaze on her, not suspicious this time, but full of something like wonder, as if he couldn't understand why she was still helping. "You don't even know my last name," he said quietly. Anna didn't turn from the stove. She didn't need to. "Names don't matter when someone's freezing in the snow," she answered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. Names mattered, names explained things, names opened doors or closed them. And Daniel's name, she suspected now, carried more weight than he wanted to admit. When she finally turned back toward him, the broth steaming in a chipped mug, Daniel looked as though he had made a decision he didn't like. "My full name," he said slowly, each word heavy, "is Daniel Hayes." The name meant nothing to Anna at first. It floated in the air like any other. But then Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a business card, polished and embossed, unmistakably expensive. On it, beneath the bold letters of Hayes Group, were the same initials she'd glimpsed earlier on the metal pin near his collar. Anna's heart stuttered, confusion tightening around her ribs. Hayes Group. The same name she'd seen on the silent TV screen earlier tonight, the missing billionaire. She looked at Daniel, snow still in his hair, exhaustion in his eyes, a sick child in his arms, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Everything she thought she understood about the man she'd let in was unraveling thread by thread. Then came the final blow. Daniel lowered his voice, almost as if Lily might hear him even in sleep. "We're not hiding from the storm, Anna," he said softly. "We're hiding from my family." For a long moment Anna simply stared at him, the weight of his confession settling into the small cabin like a second storm. Daniel Hayes. The name echoed through her mind, not as a person but as a headline, the kind that lived on muted TVs in waiting rooms and convenience stores. But seeing him here, exhausted and desperate, didn't match the polished images she remembered from screens. Instead, it made the room feel even smaller, as though too much truth had been squeezed into too little space. She breathed in slowly, steadying herself against the table. Daniel held Lily a little closer, though she remained still except for the rise and fall of her breath. His eyes were hollow, haunted by the kind of pressure most people never lived close enough to feel. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," he murmured, lowering his gaze as if ashamed of the very name that had once opened doors. "I just didn't know if I could trust you." The confession stung, sharper than she expected, cutting through her attempt to stay calm. Trust was something Anna offered rarely now. Giving it felt expensive. She set the broth aside and folded her arms, feeling a familiar wall rise inside her chest. "You didn't trust me," she said quietly. "Yet you brought your daughter into my home." The contradiction hung between them like a crack forming in ice, small but dangerous. Daniel lifted his head, meeting her eyes with an honesty that seemed to cost him something. "I didn't trust anyone," he said, "but I had no choice." She was getting worse. The words trembled with guilt, but they didn't erase the sting. Anna looked away, staring into the fire as if it might remind her who she was before this night. Someone cautious, but still willing to help. Someone who believed the world wasn't waiting to take advantage of her. But now, the same unease that once saved her life seeped back in. A billionaire hadn't just knocked on her door. He had hidden his identity, hidden his danger, and walked straight into her last piece of safety. And he hadn't even meant to tell her the truth until she cornered him. Her stomach tightened. Silence pulled at them, stretched thin by the weight of everything unsaid. Daniel moved a hand to Lily's forehead, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to put you in danger. I didn't want to put anyone in danger." The words were true. Anna could feel that, but truth didn't mend every wound. She walked to the counter and picked up the mug of broth again, focusing on the warmth seeping into her fingers. Her voice, when she spoke, held a tremor she hoped he wouldn't hear. "But you did!" Daniel flinched, as if her words were a physical blow. He rose from the couch, pacing a few steps despite exhaustion dragging at him. "If they find me, if they find us," he corrected softly, "they will twist everything. They always do." The fire cast him in shifting light, revealing a man torn between protecting the world from his problems and running from them entirely. Anna watched him with a mixture of sympathy and resentment, torn between the pain in his voice and the chaos he had dragged into her quiet life. When she offered him the broth, Daniel hesitated, surprising her. His hand hovered above the mug, then withdrew slightly, as though suddenly ashamed to accept more kindness. "You've already done too much," he said, and the words sounded like they weighed more than gratitude usually did. I'm not used to this." Anna studied him, realizing there was truth in that too. Men like Daniel Hayes didn't ask for help. They commanded it. They didn't receive mercy, they purchased it. She exhaled slowly, placing the mug on the table instead. "I don't want anything from you," she said quietly, "except honesty. That's all." The request seemed simple, but it hit Daniel hard. His expression flickered between confusion and regret. "Honesty," he repeated, tasting the word like something unfamiliar. He sank back into the couch, shoulders heavy, as if the very act of telling the truth had worn him down more than the storm outside. For the first time since he'd entered her home, Daniel looked at Anna not as a stranger or savior, but as someone who might actually hold him accountable. "The people looking for me," he said finally. "They don't want Lily safe. They want control. And I walked away from them." His voice shook, not with fear, but with a conviction that had cost him dearly. Anna felt something shift inside her, a tiny fracture in her anger, replaced reluctantly by understanding. Still, something else remained. A small, bruised place inside her that whispered a truth she couldn't swallow back. She crossed her arms again, grounding herself. "You should have told me sooner," she said, and though her voice was soft, the hurt in it was unmistakable. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling a breath that felt like surrender. "I know," he murmured, "and I'm sorry." But apologies didn't erase fear, and in the quiet between them, the first crack in their fragile bond widened, just enough for doubt to slip through. The storm eased into a steady hush, a softer kind of cold that whispered against the windows instead of clawing at them. Inside, the fire warmed the small room, but the air between Anna and Daniel had cooled into something fragile and edged. She moved around the cabin with quiet purpose, adjusting blankets, clearing space, pretending to tidy what didn't need tidying. Daniel watched from the couch, shoulders tight, as though bracing for a verdict. Pride hovered between them like a fourth presence, silent, stubborn, unyielding. Ina paused by the pantry, opening the door as if checking options she already knew were nearly gone. A single can of soup, 2 packets of noodles, half a loaf of bread. She hesitated, then took the soup, turning the label away so Daniel wouldn't see how close to empty her life really was. When she set it on the counter, she felt his gaze following her, heavy, searching, almost guilty. "I can pay you back for everything," he said quietly, "once this is over." His tone was soft, but the words pressed on her like an insult wrapped in courtesy. She didn't turn around. "I'm not doing this for money," she replied, steady but clipped. The crack of the fire punctuated her words, a sharp pop that made her jump. Daniel exhaled, running a hand over his face, the weight of his world sagging onto his posture. "I know," he murmured, "but I don't want you to lose anything because of us." The phrase "because of us" felt too heavy, too intimate, and Anna's fingers tightened around the can until its metal edges dug into her palm. She faced him finally, chin lifted in a quiet defiance she barely recognized in herself. "I've already lost things," she said. "Not because of you, because of life. Because trust can be dangerous." Daniel flinched, his eyes shifting downward as if he'd been scolded by someone he owed truth to. Pride pulsed between them, hers built from old wounds, his from a lifetime spent pretending he didn't need anyone. The two kinds of pride scraped against each other like stones in the dark, sparking tension neither of them wanted. Daniel rose from the couch, careful not to disturb Lily, and stepped closer to the fire. His silhouette flickered in the glow, making him look taller, sharper, someone accustomed to boardrooms and negotiations, not small cabins and borrowed warmth. "I'm not used to being looked at this way," he confessed quietly. "Not as a father who failed, not as a man who's desperate." The vulnerability in his voice unsettled Anna. It felt too honest, too raw, as though he were peeling back layers he rarely let anyone see. She didn't know what to do with that honesty. It felt like a gift she hadn't asked for, or a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. "Everyone gets desperate," she said softly, but her tone held a protective distance. "Money doesn't protect you from that." Daniel gave a faint, humorless smile. "No, but pride tries." He rubbed his thumb over the back of Lily's small hand, grounding himself in her presence. "I've built my whole life around not needing help from anyone. It's strange to be here, relying on you." Anna swallowed hard, torn between empathy and old resentment. "You're not the only one trying to stand on your own," she said, a tremor slipping beneath the words. "I've fought for everything I have. And it might not look like much, but it's mine." Daniel nodded slowly, as if each word she spoke carved something new into his understanding. The silence that followed wasn't cold exactly, but it was careful, a quiet truce between two people who didn't yet know how to be vulnerable without breaking. She turned back to the stove, heating the soup with methodical motions, trying to steady the shaking in her hands. Behind her, Daniel hovered near the fire, torn between approaching her and keeping his distance. Lily stirred once, a faint whimper escaping her, and they both moved at the same time, meeting halfway beside the couch. Their hands brushed for a moment as they adjusted the blanket around the child. The touch was accidental, but it startled both of them, sending a ripple of something unspoken through the room. Daniel pulled back first, clearing his throat as if to regain some sense of control. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. Anna didn't look at him, didn't trust herself to. Pride swelled again in her chest, protective, defensive, a shield she had carried for too long to set down easily. "And you're more lost than you want to admit," she replied, not unkindly, but truthfully. His breath hitched just slightly, a reaction he probably didn't intend to reveal. The wind outside thickened again, tapping at the window like impatient fingers. Daniel looked toward the sound, his posture tensing with the instinct to run, to hide, to protect Lily from whatever shadows followed him. Anna watched him, a flicker of worry threading through her ribs. She didn't fully trust him, not yet. But a deeper fear whispered something she didn't want to name, that whatever he feared might be coming for him could be coming for her too. And in the fragile quiet that followed, both of them realized something neither wanted to say aloud. Their pride was no shield against what was waiting in the dark. The storm had calmed into a fine snowfall, soft flakes drifting past the window like exhausted remnants of the night's fury. Anna stepped toward the stove to serve the soup, grateful for even a moment of stillness after so much fear and tension. But Daniel's posture had not relaxed. He hovered near the couch with the alertness of someone who expected danger to break through the walls at any second. His gaze kept flicking to the window, to the dark line of trees beyond, as if measuring the distance between safety and disaster. Anna followed his eyes and felt a faint unease rise like smoke in her chest. She carried the warm bowl toward him, but her steps faltered when she heard a low, mechanical growl in the distance. Not thunder. Not wind, something heavier. Daniel froze, his entire body stiffening as though an invisible wire had snapped tight inside him. The sound grew louder. Tires crunching over frozen earth, engines humming with purpose, lights flickering through the trees like hunting eyes. Anna set the bowl down with shaking hands, her breath catching. "Daniel." "What is that?" she whispered. But he already knew. He surged forward, pressing a finger to his lips, as if silence could somehow undo what was coming. "Stay away from the windows," he murmured urgently, his voice thin and cold. Anna's pulse raced as she stepped backward, instinctively clutching her coat around herself. The engines multiplied. 2, 3, 5 vehicles, closing in on the cabin from the narrow road that led through the forest. The crunch of tires was now unmistakable, shifting into the harsh hiss of brakes biting into snow. Daniel's face paled as headlights cut across the walls in violent sweeps of white. Before she could react, Lily whimpered, stirring in the quilt. Daniel rushed to her, whispering her name with a trembling voice that betrayed a fear deeper than the storm they'd survived. Anna moved toward them, driven by instinct rather than understanding, but the sudden explosion of bright light through the window froze her mid-step. A camera flash, then another, and another. Her breath hitched as shadows outside moved, dozens of them, voices rising, doors slamming, feet stomping through the snow with urgency and hunger. Daniel cursed under his breath, a sound so broken it barely resembled a word. "No, no, no. They weren't supposed to find us here." He pulled Lily closer, shielding her tiny body with his own, as if preparing for an assault. Anna stumbled backward, heart hammering wildly as she tried to make sense of the chaos. Flashes lit up the cabin in rapid bursts, spilling silhouettes across the ceiling like lightning. Someone shouted Daniel's full name, clear and sharp, too familiar, too public. "Daniel Hayes! Mr. Hayes! Over here!" She lifted a trembling hand to her mouth as realization hit her with the force of a falling tree. Reporters, cameras, media vans. The world had found him, found them, and her small, hidden life was no longer hidden at all. The cabin door rattled violently as someone pounded on it, shouting through the wood, "Sir, is the little girl with you? Are you okay? Who is the woman inside with you?" Anna's stomach dropped, dread blooming inside her like dark ink spreading through water. They weren't just looking for him, they were looking into her life. Daniel rose to his feet, gripping Lily as he moved toward the corner of the room, as far from the windows as possible. "Don't open the door," he said sharply, fear threading every word. "No matter what they say, don't open it." His voice cracked on the last syllable. not out of weakness, but out of a desperate need to protect his daughter from the invasive world clawing at the walls. Anna backed away too, but there was nowhere to run in the tiny cabin, nowhere to hide from the blinding flashes slicing through the window panes. The pounding intensified. "Ma'am, miss, can you step into view? Are you the one who has been harboring Daniel Hayes? Did you know he was missing?" The questions crashed through the wood, cold and cutting, each one heavier than the last. Harboring. Missing. Anna felt her knees weaken, her past wounds roaring awake all at once. People were already assuming the worst of her, again, without seeing her, without knowing her, without caring about the truth. Her hands shook uncontrollably, her vision blurring at the edges. Daniel turned toward her, guilt twisting across his face like a storm all its own. "Anna, I'm so sorry," he whispered, but his apology couldn't compete with the chaos roaring outside. Another flash exploded through the glass, illuminating her face in stark, unforgiving light. She stumbled backward instinctively, shielding her eyes as voices shouted over one another, hungry for her image, her name, her shame. She had lived quietly for years, invisible to the world, and now the world had dragged her into its glare without mercy. Then, as if the night hadn't already reached its breaking point, a female voice, polished, sharp, commanding, cut through the noise like a blade. "Daniel Hayes, step outside immediately. Your daughter needs medical care, and you need to come with us now." Daniel's breath stilled, the color drained from his face. Inna watched the last remnants of the cabin's safety shatter around them like cracked glass. The door handle turned, not knocked, turned, and Anna realized with a jolt of terror, someone on the other side had a key. For a moment after the handle turned, Anna thought her heart had stopped. The door didn't swing open, not fully, but moved just enough for cold air to lick through the crack, carrying voices, footsteps, and the hum of engines idling outside. A man's hand blocked the door from opening further, a gesture of restraint rather than force, and then the shouting softened into murmurs. Reporters stepped back, cameras lowered. Someone important had arrived, someone who held enough authority to silence a mob. And yet, inside the cabin, Anna felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Daniel stood frozen, clutching Lily, eyes darting between the door and Anna as if torn between two impossible choices. The woman outside, her voice crisp with money and power, spoke again, quieter now but firm. "Daniel, let us help Lily. And let us help you." But the way she said you didn't sound like kindness. It sounded like ownership. Daniel's jaw tightened, and he shook his head in a tiny, helpless motion. "Not like this," he whispered. "Not here." The ache in his voice was almost unbearable. Then, with the same abruptness that had shattered the morning, everything shifted. The woman ordered people back. The door closed, the engines retreated, and the world outside slowly pulled away from the cabin, leaving only tire tracks and a silence so heavy that it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. Anna leaned against the wall, her legs trembling, her palms cold with sweat. Her home, her only safe place, had been violated without anyone crossing the threshold. That felt worse than the storm, worse than the reporters, worse than the danger Daniel carried. By afternoon, the silence had grown so dense it pressed against her skin like a physical weight. Daniel sat in a chair with Lily asleep against his chest, whispering apologies Anna couldn't bear to hear. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, cleaning things that didn't need to be cleaned, touching objects she didn't remember picking up. It felt as though the walls had shrunk, squeezing her breath, her thoughts, her sense of worth. She had helped a child in need, and the world had labeled her suspicious before seeing her face. It wasn't fair, but life rarely was. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was barely a thread. "If you want me to leave, if you want us to go, I understand." Anna didn't answer at first. She stared at the kettle on the stove, at the reflection of her own outline warped in its curved metal. She felt the old humiliation of a year ago rising, the bruise on her ribs, the betrayal of trust, the promise never to open that door again. And now she had done it. And the world had stormed in anyway. "I don't want you to leave," she said softly, "but I don't know how to feel right now." Outside, the snow had softened into a thin mist drifting between the trees, but inside, Anna still felt trapped in the blizzard of the morning. Mrs. Klein, the neighbor, arrived without knocking, tapping on the window instead and motioning for Anna to step outside. When Anna opened the door just a crack, the older woman didn't offer warmth, only a cold, knowing look. "I saw all those vans," she said, "on your property. You be careful who you let in, Anna. People talk." Then she left without waiting for a response, leaving a deeper chill than the winter air. The local news played a brief segment that evening, tiny television static flickering across Daniel's frozen image, then across the shaky footage of Anna's cabin taken from outside. They blurred her face, but the implication was clear. She was part of the scandal, maybe willingly, maybe not. They speculated about motives, whispered about custody battles, finances, vanished billionaires. Words like harboring, involvement, and unidentified woman filled the room like smoke. Enna turned the volume off, but the silence afterward was worse. She sat by the dead fireplace, hands clasped together, elbows on her knees. Daniel had put Lily to sleep in the bedroom, giving them both space, but Anna could still hear his soft footsteps pacing the floor, worried, ashamed, lost. She felt no anger at the child, but a storm of emotions churned inside her toward the man who had arrived on her doorstep with secrets heavy enough to break her world. She closed her eyes, pressing her palms to them until stars burst behind her lids. "What am I doing?" she whispered to no one. When the sun dipped behind the trees, darkness filling the cabin once more, Anna felt smaller than she had felt in years. She wondered what her mother would have said if she were here, whether she would call this courage or foolishness, generosity or weakness. She wondered if kindness was worth the cost, or if she had only proven the world right, that people like her were meant to stay quiet, unseen, untouched by strangers with problems too big to fit inside a wooden cabin. The thought clawed at her chest. She rose slowly, walking to the small bedroom door. Daniel was sitting beside Lily, head bowed, fingers tangled in his hair. He looked up when she stepped inside, eyes rimmed in exhaustion and guilt. Anna didn't speak, not yet, not fully. She only said the one truth she could manage without breaking. "I don't regret helping her," she murmured, "but I don't know if I can survive what comes next." Daniel's expression folded into something painful, something helpless, and Anna realized, tonight, even with two people in her home, she had never felt more alone. Morning crept into the cabin slowly, pale light filtering through the thin curtains like a hesitant visitor, unsure if it was welcome. Ina sat at the table with her hands around a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the steam that had disappeared hours ago. Daniel and Lily had finally managed a few hours of sleep, but Anna hadn't closed her eyes once. Her mind replayed the reporter's flashes, the accusations, the way the world had twisted a moment of kindness into something suspicious. The silence felt heavier than the storm itself. When she stepped outside to bring in a bundle of firewood, the forest greeted her with quiet acceptance. Snow clung to the branches, and the tire tracks left by the vans cut deep scars into the earth. She walked carefully, her boots sinking into the soft layers, each step grounding her just enough to keep from breaking. As she reached for the last log, something thin and white caught her eye near the base of the door. It hadn't been there last night. It almost blended into the snow, an envelope, slightly damp, edges curled from frost. Anna bent down, heart quickening despite the simplicity of the object. Her fingers brushed the cold paper, and for a moment she hesitated, unsure if this meant more trouble. But when she turned it over, she saw no cruel message, no official seal, only her name written in uneven handwriting. When she opened the envelope, something soft and colorful slipped out, landing gently at her feet. A drawing. Bright crayons on a sheet of paper, slightly smudged from travel. Her breath caught. She lifted the drawing with trembling hands. 3 figures stood beneath a crooked little house with smoke curling from the chimney. A big yellow sun beamed above them. The tallest figure had long brown hair, hers. Beside her stood a man with a dark coat, and between them, small and bright, was a little girl with a pink jacket scribbled with love. At the bottom, in shaky, heartfelt letters, "Thank you, Miss Anna." A small red heart floated beside the words, uneven, imperfect, but sincere. Anna pressed the drawing to her chest, suddenly unable to speak as a warmth she hadn't felt in days bloomed deep inside her. The paper smelled faintly of crayons and childhood, the scent of something unbroken, something innocent. Her eyes blurred with tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed during the chaos. She traced the heart with her thumb, imagining Lily's small hand gripping a crayon, imagining her asking someone, Daniel or someone else, to help deliver the message, a message that crossed through fear and scandal to reach her doorstep. Inside, she found Daniel sitting up on the couch, dark circles under his eyes, worry etched into every line of his face. When he saw the paper in her hand, his expression softened into something fragile and disarming. "She wanted you to have it," he said quietly, as if afraid to interrupt the moment. Lily, still weak, lifted her head slightly from the blankets and offered a tiny, tired smile. "For you," she whispered hoarsely. The sound pierced Anna's chest in the gentlest way possible. Anna knelt beside the girl, smoothing a stray curl from her cheek. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Thank you, sweetheart." Lily's small fingers curled weakly around the edge of the quilt, but her eyes, though dimmed by fever, held a spark of trust, a spark that washed away some of the shame the world had thrown on Anna's name. Daniel's shoulders eased as he watched them, something unspoken passing through his gaze, gratitude he didn't know how to express, and a longing for safety he wasn't sure existed anymore. When Anna pinned the drawing above the mantel, right where the firelight touched it, the entire room seemed to brighten. The colors glowed softly against the wood, turning her small cabin into something warmer, fuller, almost alive. It was the first piece of color the place had seen in weeks, maybe months, and as she looked at it, Anna felt something shift inside her. Not a grand revelation, but a small, steady flame rekindling where hope had nearly gone out. She returned to the table, hands still trembling lightly, and Daniel watched her as if afraid she might pull away into the cold again. "You didn't deserve what happened yesterday," he said quietly. "None of it." His voice carried guilt, yes, but also awe, as though he couldn't quite believe anyone would help him without expecting something in return. Anna didn't answer right away. She set her hand gently on the drawing again, letting its warmth speak for her. "I needed this," she finally said, her voice soft but stronger than it had been since the chaos began. Not the trouble, not the fear, just this reminder. She looked at Daniel, meeting his eyes without hesitation for the first time since the cameras. A reminder that kindness matters, even when the world twists it. Daniel swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat as he nodded once, slow and sincere. For the first time, he looked less like a man running from something and more like a man trying to rebuild himself. Outside, the snowfall continued, light and gentle now, no longer threatening, just falling in peace. Inside, the drawing glowed above the fireplace, a bright little promise in a world that had felt too dark. And as Anna stared at it, she realized that despite everything, something had survived the storm. Something warm, something tender, something worth protecting. The morning after the drawing arrived, Anna stepped outside to gather the last of the dry wood near the shed, feeling the cold nip her cheeks, but no longer sink into her bones the way it had before. The drawing above the mantel had changed something in her, subtle but steady, like a soft pulse returning to a wrist once thought lifeless. She kept replaying Lily's small, tired smile, the way her tiny fingers had reached for Anna, with such trust. But as she walked along the narrow path, her boots crunching over the frost, she sensed the world wasn't done knocking at her door. A faint humming drifted through the trees, smooth, controlled, nothing like the chaotic roar of the media vans from before. Anna froze. Engines didn't come down this forest road, not unless they had a reason, and not unless they belonged to someone who didn't care about the isolation the cabin offered. She shielded her eyes from the thin sunlight filtering through the branches, peering toward the clearing at the end of the dirt road. And then she saw it. A sleek, black car, polished enough to reflect the sky, idling beside the tree line like a silent sentinel. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the loud, frantic chaos of reporters. This was quiet, intentional, almost respectful. As she took a step backward, the driver's door opened, and a man emerged wearing a dark coat and gloves, his posture straight, composed, too composed for a place like this. He didn't call out. He didn't approach quickly. Instead, he raised a hand in a polite gesture, almost deferential. "Miss Morales," he called, voice calm, controlled by years of discipline. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Hayes." Anna's pulse quickened. She glanced back toward the cabin, where Daniel was inside tending to Lily, unaware of the shift happening outside. Part of her wanted to turn and run back into the safety of the small wooden walls, but another part, one shaped by pride, by dignity, by the pain of the previous day, kept her rooted. "What do you want?" she asked, her breath turning into white clouds. The driver stepped closer, hands visible, careful not to appear threatening. "Mr. Hayes asked that I deliver this." He extended a small envelope sealed with a discreet embossed crest. The sight of another envelope made Anna's stomach twist. Yesterday's envelope had brought hope. This one, she wasn't sure. She hesitated, staring at the elegant seal that looked so out of place against her worn gloves. Finally, she reached for it, her fingers brushing the driver's for a brief, tense moment. The paper was thick, expensive, heavier than anything she usually held. "He didn't want to disturb you," the driver continued, "but he kindly requests a meeting, a private one." The words hung in the cold air like slow-falling snowflakes. Anna opened the envelope cautiously, revealing a simple card printed on quality stock. A handwritten message, unmistakably Daniel's, stretched across the page. "There are things I need to tell you. Things I should have said sooner. If you are willing, please meet me." Below the note was the address of a hotel in town, one she'd only seen from a distance, a place where people like her rarely walked through the front doors. Her throat tightened as she read the final line. "I want to make things right." The driver remained silent, giving her space, his gaze respectfully lowered. Anna folded the card and pressed it to her chest, unsure whether it warmed her or chilled her. Part of her felt flattered, seen, acknowledged, but another part recoiled from the idea of entering Daniel's world, a world built on polished surfaces and hidden battles. She closed her eyes briefly, hearing her mother's voice whispering in the wind, reminding her that dignity was not measured by wealth, but by choice. But which choice was the right one? She lifted her gaze toward the cabin, imagining Daniel pacing, worrying, waiting for something he couldn't yet name. He had brought chaos into her home, but he had also brought truth, messy, painful, unfinished truth, and he had asked her, not ordered her, to meet him. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. Anna turned back to the driver, her jaw tight with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Tell him I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heartbeat. "I make no promises." The driver nodded respectfully. "Of course, Miss Morales." He returned to the car, and as it rolled slowly down the path, snow crunching beneath the tires, Anna stood alone in the clearing, staring at the fading taillights until they disappeared completely behind the trees. She held the card in both hands, fingers trembling, not from cold, but from the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. Her breath misted upward, dissolving into the white sky like a prayer she didn't know how to say. When she finally walked back toward the cabin, each step felt heavier, as though the forest itself were urging her to choose carefully. But inside, the fire glowed. Lily slept, and Daniel waited without knowing what the world had just placed at her feet. And as Anna paused at the door, one truth settled gently in her chest. Destiny didn't knock this time. It sent a car. Anna arrived at the hotel, feeling like she'd stepped into a world built from someone else's dreams. Polished floors, so reflective they seemed to swallow her boots, tall ceilings that made her feel smaller with every breath, and quiet air that smelled faintly of citrus and wealth. She clutched her coat tighter around herself as she walked toward the front desk, aware of the curious glances from people who didn't expect to see someone like her in a place like this. A receptionist directed her to a private conference room on the top floor, her voice gentle but distant, as though speaking across an invisible divide. With each step into the elevator, Anna felt her heart climb higher into her throat. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a hallway lined with art she didn't know how to interpret. She followed the discreet signage until she found the room number Daniel had written. But when she pushed the door open, her breath stalled. Daniel wasn't there. Instead, a woman stood beside the long mahogany table, posture straight, hair sleek, eyes sharp enough to cut through the silence. She extended a hand with a rehearsed smile. "Ms. Morales, I'm Victoria Rhodes," she said. "Mr. Hayes's attorney." The title landed in the room like a cold coin dropped onto marble. Anna shook her hand, sensing the chill beneath Victoria's courtesy. The attorney gestured to a chair and slid a thick folder across the table, its weight disproportionate to its size. "We appreciate your cooperation," Victoria began, her tone smooth, practiced, impossible to interrupt. "The media attention has been unfortunate for everyone." Her eyes flicked up briefly, as if measuring Anna's reaction. "This document outlines a non-disclosure agreement that would protect you, protect Lily, and protect Mr. Hayes." Something in the phrasing made Anna's stomach twist. As Anna opened the folder, the pages seemed to multiply before her eyes. Dense paragraphs, legal language, unfamiliar terms that felt intentionally tangled. Victoria continued speaking, her voice calm and unhurried, like someone delivering a sermon she had recited 100 times. "You would receive a generous financial compensation. Additionally, Mr. Hayes is prepared to arrange new housing accommodations for you, should you prefer more privacy." The words "financial compensation" clung to the air like a heavy perfume, masking something sour beneath it. Anna blinked, the print swimming slightly as she flipped to another page. "What exactly am I signing?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Victoria clasped her hands on the table, gaze unwavering. "You would agree not to discuss the events of Christmas Eve, the incident at your residence, or any personal details regarding Mr. Hayes or his family. In essence," she smiled as if offering a gift, "you would be free from further involvement." Free. The word stung. It felt less like liberation and more like erasure. Anna closed the folder gently, as though afraid it might break if handled too firmly. "And Daniel?" she asked. "He couldn't come." Victoria's expression didn't change, but her voice cooled by a degree. "Mr. Hayes is grateful, of course, but he must protect his company and his daughter. His presence could complicate things." The explanation fell flat, too polished to be true. Anna felt a slow burn rise beneath her ribs, not anger yet, but something close. "I want to speak with him," she said softly. Victoria's smile tightened, just slightly. "That won't be necessary," the attorney replied. "Mr. Hayes has delegated this matter to us entirely. Your signature would allow him to move forward without further complications." Complications. The word echoed in Anna's head, sharp as broken glass. She thought of Lily's drawing above her mantel. She thought of Daniel's trembling voice in the storm. And yet here she was, reduced to a complication to be managed, filed, and forgotten. Anna's fingers curled around the edge of the folder as though gripping the truth she refused to let slip away. "Why housing?" she asked, her tone pointed now. Victoria blinked, taken aback by the question. "Excuse me?" Anna leaned forward, eyes steady. "You offered money, housing, silence. That's not protection, that's removal. You're trying to move me away." Victoria hesitated only a fraction of a second, barely visible but enough. "We simply want what's best for all parties involved," she said. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. It wasn't concern. It was containment. The room seemed to grow colder, the walls closing in as the truth settled on Anna like fresh snow. They didn't want her help. They wanted her absence. They wanted to rewrite the story, to erase her kindness, to control the image of a billionaire who had fled into a storm and landed at the door of a poor woman with nothing to gain and too much to lose. And they wanted to pay her not to exist in the narrative at all. The realization pierced her like a needle through cloth. She pushed the folder away, her spine straightening with a quiet strength she hadn't felt in years. "I won't sign anything," Anna said, her voice soft but immovable. Victoria exhaled slowly, the polite mask slipping just enough to reveal irritation, maybe even fear. "Ms. Morales, refusing this agreement could expose you to significant scrutiny. The media will not show mercy." But Anna didn't waver. "They didn't show mercy yesterday either," she replied. "Yet here I am." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but the door behind them swung open without warning. Footsteps echoed across the polished floor, heavy, urgent, familiar. Anna turned. Daniel stood in the doorway, breathless, eyes wide with alarm, as if he had just found out something that changed everything. Daniel crossed the room with a tension that made the air itself tighten, his eyes locked on the folder pushed away from Anna's hands. His breath came uneven, as if he had run up the entire length of the hotel just to stop something from happening. Victoria straightened instantly, smoothing her expression back into icy professionalism, but the flicker of surprise in her eyes was unmistakable. "Mr. Hayes," she said cautiously, "you weren't scheduled." But Daniel waved her off, the gesture abrupt and raw. "Anna," he said, voice trembling with urgency, "did you sign anything?" His gaze moved from her face to the closed folder, to the chair she sat in, then back to her again, as though trying to piece together what had been said in his absence. Anna felt her throat tighten, not in fear, but in a deep, unexpected hurt. "She asked me to," Anna replied quietly. "But I didn't." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, relief and shame washing over him in equal measure. When he opened them again, the exhaustion there cut deeper than any headline ever could. Victoria stepped forward, her composure cracking just enough to reveal tension beneath the surface. "Mr. Hayes, with all respect, the situation requires urgency. We cannot risk further exposure." Daniel turned on her sharply, his voice a low, simmering command Anna had not heard from him before. Enough! The single word filled the room, heavy and final. Victoria fell silent, though her jaw tightened. Anna watched Daniel, really watched him, and saw not the billionaire from TV screens, but a man stretched thin by fear and guilt and expectations too heavy for one person to bear. He moved closer to Anna, slower now, as if afraid she might flinch. "I didn't authorize this," he said, voice roughened by emotion. "Not like this. Not without me." Anna swallowed hard, her hands tightening around the armrests of the chair. "But you sent the car," she murmured. The pain behind her words made Daniel's face twist as though he had been struck. "I sent the car to talk to you," he said, "to explain myself, not to buy your silence." The truth in his voice was raw, unpolished, unguarded, and somehow heavier than any lie could have been. Victoria stepped forward again, desperation slipping into her tone now. "Mr. Hayes, this is not about silence. It's about survival. A scandal of this magnitude could damage the company, your custody case, your—" Daniel whipped around again, eyes blazing. "Do you hear yourself? Do you hear how she sounds when she talks about my daughter?" His voice cracked, a mixture of fury and fear. "All this time, it's been about appearances, about reputations, about control. But Lily was burning with fever in my arms, and Anna saved her. Not you, not the company. Anna." The silence that followed was thick and stunned. Victoria drew in a slow breath, regaining her icy calm. "We are trying to protect you." Daniel shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "You're trying to protect an image. I am trying to protect my child." He turned back to Anna, his voice dropping. "And you were dragged into this because of me, because I made choices that hurt you, choices I should have handled differently." Anna felt her heart thud painfully, not because of his words, but because of the sincerity behind them. She rose slowly from her chair, meeting his gaze without lowering her chin. "You didn't hurt me by coming to my door," she said softly. "You hurt me by not trusting me with the truth." Daniel inhaled sharply, as though the sentence pierced straight through his defenses. "You're right," he said, his voice breaking around the edges. "I thought I was protecting you from my world. I didn't realize I was pushing you into its worst part." His hands trembled slightly as he lowered them to his sides, palms open, not commanding, not controlling, but surrendering. Anna's eyes drifted toward the thick contract on the table, its pages still open to the legal knots meant to bind her into silence. "They wanted to make me disappear," she whispered. Daniel followed her gaze, shame tightening his jaw. "Over my dead body," he muttered. Victoria stiffened, but Daniel didn't care. He stepped closer to Anna, his voice low, steady, solemn. "From now on, anything that happens, press, family, lawyers, you'll hear it from me directly, no more secrets." Anna studied him, seeing the man behind the panic, behind the wealth, behind the chaos, the father, the flawed human being trying to do something right for once. Something shifted inside her, not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of something that mattered just as much. Clarity. She nodded, a small but deliberate gesture. Daniel exhaled shakily, relief softening the lines around his eyes. For the first time since the storm, they were facing each other without fear in the way. But before Anna could speak again, the conference room door burst open. Two men in suits entered, urgent, pale, holding a tablet with a breaking headline flashing across the screen. "Daniel Hayes found, but who is the woman hiding him?" Anna's face was on it, unblurred, exposed. Daniel's eyes widened in horror. For several seconds, no one in the room moved. Anna stared at the tablet, her own face staring back at her through harsh studio lighting, frozen mid-blink, mid-fear, mid-life. Daniel's expression collapsed into a mixture of fury and disbelief, as if the ground had opened beneath them. Victoria muttered something under her breath, too low to catch, too sharp to be accidental. But Anna felt only the cold, the deep hollow cold of being exposed without consent, her quiet life torn apart a second time in less than 24 hours. Her hand drifted to her throat, searching for stability that wasn't there. Daniel recovered first, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the storm inside him. "Turn it off!" he snapped at the men, but they hesitated, protocol warring with panic. "Turn it off!" he repeated, and this time they obeyed. Ina stepped back, shaking as though the image on the screen had reached out and pushed her. "They weren't supposed to have your picture," Daniel whispered, horrified. "I was told, promised, it was blurred." Victoria stiffened. "Someone leaked it," she said. "Not from us." But her tone had the brittleness of a lie stretched too thin. A swell of whispers grew in the hallway outside the conference room, voices gathering like rising water. The headline was spreading fast, faster than any PR plan could contain it. Anna felt rooted in place, though her instinct begged her to run, hide, vanish into the forest that had always protected her. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she murmured, voice fragile but steady. Daniel moved toward her, palms open, as if approaching something breakable. "Anna, please, don't let them define you. Let me fix this." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering with a mixture of hurt and defiance. "You can't fix what they choose to see," she said. "They already decided I'm something I'm not." Daniel swallowed hard, shame pulling at his expression. "Then let me show them who you are." His voice was quiet, but charged, a promise forming right there in the space between them. Victoria stepped forward abruptly. "Daniel, that would be catastrophic for the company." But he cut her off with a look so sharp she silenced instantly. "I don't care about the company," he said. "I care about the truth." Security knocked on the door. 3 urgent taps. "Sir, the press has gathered downstairs. They're asking for a statement." A muscle in Daniel's jaw twitched. "Good," he murmured. "They'll get one." He turned to Anna, softer now. "You don't have to come with me. You never have to stand in that fire again." Anna looked down at her trembling hands, then at the empty chair in the corner, then at the closed folder on the table, a life she refused to sign away. When she lifted her gaze again, something resolute had settled inside her. "I'll stand with you," she said, "because if I don't tell the truth, someone else will tell it wrong." Daniel exhaled shakily, as though her words had steadied him more than anything his advisers had offered. He reached out, not touching her, but offering his arm like something formal, almost old-fashioned. Anna hesitated only a second before placing her hand lightly on his sleeve. Together, they walked out of the conference room and into the bright hallway where security guided them toward the lobby. The elevator ride felt too quiet, too fast, the music too soft for the intensity building in both their chests. By the time the doors opened, the sound of voices crashed in like a wave. The lobby was packed. Reporters leaning forward, cameras raised, microphones jutting like spears toward the center of the room. Flashbulbs exploded the moment Daniel stepped into view. Questions flew like arrows. Why were you hiding? Who is the woman? Is she involved? Where have you been? Every word felt aimed at Anna, but Daniel stepped forward, shielding her with his presence, his frame, his voice. Enough, he commanded. You want answers? Then listen. The room fell into a breathless hush. Daniel took a single step closer to the crowd, his voice carrying not with power, but with truth. On Christmas Eve, I was a father terrified of losing the most important person in my life. My daughter had a fever I couldn't control, and we were stranded in a storm I wasn't prepared for. He turned slightly, enough to reveal Anna at his side. This woman didn't know my name. She didn't know my world. She owed me nothing, and she saved us anyway. Cameras flashed again, so bright Anna blinked, but she held her ground. Daniel wasn't done. While others judged her, twisted her kindness, and painted her as a villain, she fed my child, warmed her, watched over her while I tried to keep myself from falling apart. His voice shook openly now. If you're looking for a story, here it is. I was lost, and she was the only one who opened a door. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Surprise, discomfort, realization. Victoria watched from the side, expression unreadable, but even she knew control had slipped from her hands. Daniel reached for Anna's hand then, not dramatically, not theatrically, but with a quiet sincerity that startled her. "If you want to report something," he said, turning back to the cameras, "report this. Kindness still exists, and I owe mine to her." It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't strategic. It was simply painfully true. And the truth, spoken in such a raw place, settled over the room like fresh snow, softening the edges, reshaping the landscape. As microphones were lowered, as questions shifted from accusation to awe, something inside Anna loosened for the first time since the storm began. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't a scandal. She was the truth. Anna had never imagined her life would shift in quiet ways, more than in loud ones. After the press conference, the world did not immediately quiet down, but inside her, something finally had. The hotel hallways, once intimidating, now felt like corridors she could walk without shrinking. Daniel's words echoed gently in her memory, not the part spoken into microphones, but the soft one he'd whispered as security led them away. "Thank you for not letting them rewrite who you are." Anna held that close, like a small stone warmed in the hand. Weeks passed, each day bridging the fragile space between chaos and healing. A social worker visited, then a representative from Hayes Group, then a doctor to check on Lily, each treating Anna with a respect she wasn't used to. Daniel made sure of it. He came by often, not with grand gestures, but with presence, carrying groceries, helping stack firewood, repairing the loose hinge on her cabinet door, little things that spoke louder than promises. Anna found herself softening in ways she didn't fully understand. When the offer came, a stable job coordinating care for elderly clients through a new community program, Anna nearly refused out of habit. But Daniel had simply smiled and said, "It's not charity, it's a chance." And strangely, she believed him. The first morning she walked into the small office on the edge of town, she felt like a person reclaiming a life she had once abandoned in pieces. Her co-workers welcomed her warmly, not because they knew her story, but because they recognized her heart in the work she did. The cabin, once a sanctuary and prison all at once, grew quieter as she spent more hours in town. It no longer felt like the place she was meant to carry every burden. It had served its purpose, a shelter in storms, a witness to her fears, a keeper of promises and wounds. Now, standing at the window one last time, watching the sun lay gold across the snow, Anna realized she no longer needed walls to feel safe. She needed space, space to grow, space to breathe, space to let herself be seen. Daniel helped her pack, though she insisted she could do it alone. "I know you can," he'd said with a soft laugh, "but you don't have to." Lily, healthier now, played on the floor with Anna's grandmother's old scarf, wrapping it around herself like a royal cape. Anna watched her with quiet affection, remembering the feverish child who had once whimpered in her bed. The transformation felt like a small miracle, and one she could not take credit for alone. It had taken courage from all of them, in different ways. They moved her belongings into a small, bright apartment in town, a place with sunlight in the mornings and a kitchen that smelled like possibility. The landlord, a gentle woman with warm eyes, welcomed Anna as if she had always belonged there. When she turned the new key in the lock for the first time, something inside her shifted, like a knot loosening after years of being pulled too tight. She stepped inside, breathing in air that hadn't been shaped by fear or grief. It smelled like new beginnings, but healing rarely asks permission. It simply arrives, sometimes in a quiet moment alone at the sink, sometimes in a shared conversation on the couch, sometimes in the way Lily hugged her without hesitation. Daniel came by 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes with updates about the custody case, sometimes with stories about Lily's drawings, sometimes with nothing at all except the desire to sit for a while. Anna didn't question it. They were both still learning how to live without bracing for storms. One evening, as she unpacked the last of her boxes, a soft knock came at the apartment door. Anna froze, not with fear, but with instinct. Old habits still whispered warnings in her bones. She pressed a hand to the knob, inhaling slowly, as she reminded herself, this was not the cabin, this was not the past. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar outline, tall, patient, uncertain. Daniel, holding something wrapped in brown paper under his arm, shifting his weight like a man carrying words too delicate to speak loudly. Anna opened the door. Their eyes met, and neither of them filled the moment with apologies or explanations. Daniel offered the wrapped object with an almost shy smile. "A housewarming gift," he said. "From Lily." Anna took it slowly, her fingers brushing his. The warmth lingered long after the touch had passed. Inside the wrapping, she discovered a framed version of Lily's drawing. The crooked house, the 3 figures, the bright yellow sun, now preserved behind glass, like a memory chosen rather than forced. She stared at it for a long moment before lifting her gaze back to him, something gentle and unspoken rising between them. Not romance, not expectation, something softer. 2 people standing at the threshold of their new selves, unsure of what comes next, but no longer afraid to find out. Daniel took a small step backward, giving her space, and Anna found herself smiling despite the tightness in her chest. And just as she was about to speak, a faint sound drifted from the hallway. Another knock, hesitant, unfamiliar, soft, waiting. Anna and Daniel exchanged a glance, the kind that holds a question neither dares to voice. Anna hesitated only a second before opening the door, a soft echo of old fear brushing against her heart before fading away. But instead of danger, she found Mrs. Klein standing there, holding a plate of sugar-dusted cookies with an embarrassed half-smile. The neighbor who once judged her now looked smaller, humbled, almost shy. "I saw everything on the news," she murmured. "I wanted to apologize." Anna returned a gentle smile that warmed the hallway more than the heater ever could. Mrs. Klein offered the cookies with trembling hands. "You did something beautiful," she said, "and I misjudged you." Anna touched her arm kindly. "We all misjudge sometimes." The 2 women exchanged a quiet truce, a soft nod of understanding formed from the ashes of fear and rumor. When the neighbor walked away, Anna closed the door slowly, sensing not an ending, but the gentle beginning of something new. The kind of beginning built on truth instead of whispers. Daniel leaned against the wall, watching with that tentative half-smile he still didn't know how to wear. "She likes you," he teased softly. Anna laughed under her breath and set the cookies on the counter. "She just remembers we're all human," she replied. Daniel exhaled deeply, the tension draining from his shoulders in visible waves. He looked different now, less steel, more warmth, less weight, more grace. And in her own reflection, Anna saw changes too. Lily toddled out of the bedroom, dragging a blanket behind her, hair tousled from her nap. She ran straight to Anna, wrapping her small arms around the woman's legs with a trust that undid every guard still left in Anna's chest. "Miss Anna, can I draw here today?" she asked, her voice still soft from sleep. Anna knelt and kissed the top of her head. You can draw here any time." Daniel watched them both with a gratitude so honest it needed no words at all. Later, while Lily colored on the living room floor, Anna and Daniel stepped onto the balcony, watching soft flakes drift like quiet blessings over the city. "You know," he began, voice low and reflective, "I thought I needed to protect you from my world. But I see now, you don't need protecting, you need respecting." Anna looked toward the horizon, letting his words settle like warm light in her chest. "And you need someone who reminds you of that," she answered gently. The silence that followed was peaceful, filled with everything unspoken but deeply understood. No pressure, no expectations, just presence, steady, simple, healing. Anna breathed in deeply, feeling the kind of calm she once believed belonged only to other people. The kind of calm that whispered of safety, of belonging, of possibility, maybe even of joy, quietly returning after being gone too long. Daniel turned to her softly. "Have you ever thought about not doing everything alone?" Anna didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped inside and watched Lily proudly lift a new drawing from the floor. This time, the picture showed a little house, the familiar crooked roof, and 4 figures standing in front of it. Lily beamed. "It's us." Anna felt something warm and fragile unfurl inside her. "Maybe it's time I learn," she whispered. The rest of the afternoon passed gently, as if the hours themselves walked with soft feet. Daniel made hot chocolate with too much cocoa. Lily invented stories for her crayons. Anna unpacked the last of her boxes, placing books on the shelf as if rebuilding parts of herself along with them. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't fame. It was something rarer, the feeling of being safe inside her own life again. Piece by piece, the past loosened its grip. As night settled, lights twinkled from nearby windows like scattered hope across the city. Daniel stood at the door, holding Lily as she rested her head on his shoulder. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said, in a tone gentle enough to soften any lingering doubts. Anna nodded, smiling a smile that felt real and rested. When the door closed, she looked around her new home, her own space filled with quiet peace, and felt gratitude rise like a tide. She walked to the table and lifted the framed drawing Lily had given her. The little yellow sun, the crooked house, the figures standing close together. It was all there, the truth of who they had become. She traced the sun with her thumb, realizing it had been there all along, even in her darkest storms. It only needed someone to open the right door. And finally, she had. If this story touched your heart, leave a heart in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and click the end screen to watch another story filled with kindness and redemption.